Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samech, Daf 60 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, Daf Samech. Well, if I'm not mistaken, Yevamos is 122 Daf. That makes 60 like pretty nearly halfway. Friends, we're doing it. We're getting to the other side of the hill. Yevamos. Friends, what would you say? Is this the hardest Masechta we learned so far? Could be. Friends, we're doing it, friends. We're doing it. Yeah. We're doing it. Friends, who could tell me what Daf 60 talks about? Well, Ones umefuta. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Anus umefuta. Like by a Kohen Gadol, can he marry a woman who's been raped or seduced? Okay. Then we talk about a Kohen becoming tummy to his sister. Then a little bit about converting. So let's jump in. Alright, Daf Nuntes Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Amr Rafuna, no. Imnosa Nosui. Okay. So we had said, where did we say this? I imagine in the Mishnah? No, not in the Mishnah. We said it like right before this, right? Anusas atzma ufutas atzma. Yeah, it's like 3 lines earlier. Anusas atzma ufutas atzma lo yisa v'imnosa nosu. So we said that if a Kohen Gadol rapes or seduces a woman, so then he cannot marry her because he has to marry a basula, and she's not a basula because he slept with her, so he can't marry her. So, but we said but if he does marry her, then it works. Amar Rafuna Amar Rav Motzi Beget, and then Rafuna says the name of Rav, but he immediately has to divorce her. So, what about the fact though that we said that if he gets married, then he's married? What kind of marriage is that if you have to immediately get divorced? It's saying that he's married to the extent that he doesn't pay a fine by a mefuta, right? If a fellow sleeps with a basula, right, outside of the context of marriage, so if it was onus, if it was rape, so then he has to pay her father 50 silver coins, no matter what, and then he has to also be married to her. When it comes to seduction, where it was consensual, so then he marries her, he remains married, and then he remains with her, they get married, and then he doesn't need to pay any money to her father. But if he does not stay with her, so then he has to pay money to her father. So we're saying over here that what does it mean that he's married, that he's considered that so if he rapes or seduces this woman, so he shouldn't marry her, and if he does, they're married, but he has to get divorced right away. So what's the significance of their being married? Well, the significance is to the extent that if it was mefuta, if it was consensual, so then he would not have to pay her father any money since they're considered married, and by mefuta, by seduction, if they get married, so then the fellow doesn't need to pay her father anything. Also, Rav Gvia mi Beiksil Amr l'shmaita kamid Ravashi. So if Kaviyah Mibeksil went and he said to Rav Ashi this teaching of Rafuna, the name of Rav, that the Kohen Gadol and this woman who he slept with need to get divorced right away. Omerle, to which Rav Ashi says to Rav Kaviyah Mibeksil, he says, Rav Rabbi Yochanan Dami Tavai, but Rav and Rabbi Yochanan both said Bogeres Mukoseitz Lo Yisa, that when it comes to a Bogeres, a girl who's 12 and a half years old or older, or a mukas eitz, or a girl who, I guess, kind of, how do we explain this? Well, she lost the physical representations of her virginity, but not from a man. How's that? V'im nosa nosui, right? So Rav and Rabbi Yochanan both say that when it comes to Bulgaris and a mukas eitz, so then a Kohen Gadol should not marry her. But if he does, then they're considered married. So we see that how come? That's because, well, look, Lamaisa, she was going to end up becoming a Bulgaris eventually anyways. she was going to end up being a mukaseitz anyway. She was going to lose her virginity with him anyway, since they're getting married. So, kilu, yes. The Kohen Gadol should not marry a mukaseitz. The Kohen Gadol should not marry a bogeres. However, if he does, they could remain together because, look, even if he marries a katana, eventually she's going to be a bogeres. Even if she marries a basula, eventually she's going to not be a basula anymore. So, achanami, we should say the same thing over here. So, for those bu'ula ta'achtav. So here also, when it comes to anusa umufuta, if they get married, they should be able to remain married, even though they shouldn't get married, but if they do, they should be able to remain married, just like by a bogeres, just like by a mukaseitz, since eventually she's going to be a bogeres anyways, since eventually she's going to be a mukaseitz anyways. Here also, eventually she's going to be a bu'ula anyways. So therefore, I don't understand, says Ravashi, that they should be able to remain together. Kasha. The Gemara says it's taka kasha. Anusas chaver muvutas chaver lo yiso. We said now the Kohen Gadol, if he marries a girl who somebody else had slept with her, not him, so he should not marry her. V'imnasa Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer avolod cholol v'chacham omer avolod kosher. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that the child is a cholol, right? That if he marries in anusa or mufuta, the child is a cholol. Of course, I had a friend growing up who thought he was a cholol, but depending on how you hold, maybe he wasn't. V'chacham omer avolod kosher, whereas the chacham say that the child is taka kosher. The child is taka kosher. That if a Kohen Gadol were to marry in a nusa umufuta, so the child would be a kosher child. Amar Huna Merav Alocha Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, says Rav Huna in the name of Rav. The Alocha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that if a Kohen Gadol marries in a nusa umufuta of somebody else that somebody else slept with her, so then the child is a cholol. Of course, Rabbi Gidol Amarav also says that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Yikadam. That doesn't say Rav Huna Amarav. Says Rav Huna in the name of Rav. My time with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What's the rationale for Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? How come Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that if a Kohen Gadol sleeps with the anusas chavero, mufutas chavero, so the child will be a cholol? So Savila Krib Elazar. So because he holds like Rabbi Elazar. Says Rav Huna in the name of Rav that the reason why Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that the child is a cholol is because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds like Rabbi Elazar. What does Rabbi Elazar say? Rabbi Elazar says that what does Rabbi Elazar say? Rabbi Elazar says that if a man and a woman sleep together outside of the context of marriage, so then she's considered a zona. Now a Kohen is not allowed to marry a zona, and therefore, if they are together, so the child is going to be a cholol. When we saw v'lo kavase, but one second, does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov really hold like Rabbi Elazar? But of course, we hold, as we've seen for the third time, as far as I can remember together, that we hold that Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kav v'noki, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't come up so often, but when he does, we paskin like him. So that means the Memele Halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that the child is a cholol. Ve'ilu b'ha Amr Rav Amim ein halacha k'Rabbi Elazar. And yet, when it comes to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, that if a man and a woman sleep with each other outside of the context of marriage, she's considered a zona. When Rabbi Elazar says that, we don't paskin like Rabbi Elazar. And therefore, if Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who we do paskin like, is basing his rationale for saying that the child of an anusa mufuta and a kohen gadol would be a cholol, if the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he's basing his opinion based on the teaching of Rabbi Elazar that any union outside of the context of marriage, the child would be, so she would be considered a zona, and therefore the child would be a cholol. But we don't paskin like Rabbi Elazar, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer is basing his opinion. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is basing his opinion on Rabbi Elazar. But we don't paskin like Rabbi Elazar, so then we shouldn't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov either. But we do paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Friends, what do we do? Kasha. We say it's taka kasha. What do you want me to tell you? Ravashi Amar says Ravashi, be'eshchol michavi ese kamiflige. So Ravashi says actually the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Chachamim about whether the child of a kohen gadol and an anusa mufuta would be considered a cholol or not. So it's taka. The dispute centers around Yesh cholol michavi esei. Can you have a cholol from a chiyuv esei? Let's go weiter for a second. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov savar yesh cholol michavi esei. Rabbanan savar ein cholol michavi esei. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says yes, you can have a cholol from michavi esei, and the Rabbanan say you do not have a cholol from michavi esei. My time with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What are we talking about? But there's a cholol for a chavi esei. What are we talking about? The pasuk says amana grusha v'cholol zona esei lo yukach. The pasuk says by Kohen Gadol that he does not marry a widow, a divorcee, a zona. Ki im besula v'gomer. Who does the Kohen Gadol marry? A besula, implying that he does not marry beula. So that's a lavaba michlal esei, right? That a prohibition that is only comes from the implication of a positive commandment, right? Marry a besula. The implication being, do not marry a beula, and therefore says, the prohibition against a Kohen Gadol marrying a beula is an essay, and it says, and then the very next pasuk says, and they shouldn't make any cholos, i.e., that even when it comes to marrying a beula, which is only a lavaba michlal esei, a chayve esei, right? It's only a prohibition, right? The prohibition against marrying a beula only comes from the implication of a positive commandment, which is marry a besula, and therefore we treat the prohibition as with the same severity as we treat a positive commandment, an essay, and still we're saying v'leichal zar ba'amav, and you shouldn't make any chalos, implying that even this chayve essay would still make a cholol. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that if this Kohen Gadol sleeps with an anusa or mefuta, which is she's a beula, and therefore it's a chayve essay, the child will still be a cholol, even though it's treated as a mitzvah essay, not a mitzvah lo saisei. V'abonon, and the rabbis who say that the child is kosher, eilehiv siko inyon. If you look at the pasuk, it says amano grusha v'chalal zone. Right, Amana Grusha Zona, and says as Eile lo yikach kim besulim yamav yikachisha. That the word Eile comes to divide between the likes of Amana Grusha Zona and a besula, to say that there's a difference, that by Amana Grusha Zona the child would be a cholol, but if he marries a beula, the child would not be a cholol, because it's the pasuk is divided by the word eile. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omar eile lemute nida. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says no. The role of eile in the pasuk is to exclude a nida. That if he sleeps with his wife when she's if a kohen sleeps with his wife when she's a nida, and there's a child, the child will not be a cholol. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the child will be a cholol for armana, grusha, zona, be'ula. In all those cases, the child will be a cholol, but eila comes to exclude a nida, that if a kohen sleeps with his wife as a nida, so then the child would not be a cholol. Manazlah Tanya, like who does the following brayso go like? Me'eila ata osei chol v'ata osei chol minida, that from these listed in the pasuk, amona, grusha, zona, be'ula, the child will be a cholol, minid, right? But ve'iyata osei chol minida, from a nida, there would not be a cholol, that if a kohen sleeps with his wife as a nida, the child is not a cholol. Come on, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that's like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov nichtve le'el v'sof kasha. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, so why have eila smack in the middle of the pasuk, where it divides up between almana, grusha, zona on the one hand, and besula? According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, eila should just be at the end of the pasuk after besula, right? Which implies not that he should not marry a beula. So why have it divide up if it's really not dividing up anything according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? The Gemara says kasha is taka guta kasha. So now the Gemara discusses the topic of a kohen becoming tummy to his sister. Right? The pasuk says that a kohen is allowed to become tummy to immediate relatives. So that includes his sister. However, what happens if she's married? Does it still include her? Right? The pasuk says v'lachosa b'sula krova elav, that his sister is a b'sula, who is close to Mashaloh Haisali, she wasn't connected to any other man, lo yitama, he can become tummy to her. So now, says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, the Rabbi said, achosa arusa. What happens if his sister is engaged? If his sister is engaged and then she dies, can he become tummy to her? Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda mitamila. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say yes, he can go to become tummy for her. Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon omim ein mitamila. And Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say no. Once his sister is engaged, so then he can no longer become tummy to her if she dies. Anusa mufuta devriakol ein mitamila. So look, when it comes to a woman who was raped or seduced, right? If his sister was raped or seduced, so then he would not be able to become tummy to her because it says v'lachosa b'sula. In this case, she's not a basula, so he cannot become tummy to her. Umukas eitz ein mitamila to Reb Shimon. Says Reb Shimon, also she's a mukas eitz. So then I guess she's not technically in some ways a basula, and therefore says Reb Shimon. So he would not be able to become tummy to his sister who's a mukas eitz. Shai Reb Shimon Omer. Reb Shimon would say ru'ui l'kohen gadol mitamila. That if she would be fit to marry a kohen gadol, so then her brother could become tummy for her if she dies. But if she'd be unable to marry a kohen gadol, so then her brother cannot become tummy for her if she dies. And Reb Shimon, of course, had said in our Mishnah that v'loisa is mukas eitz, that a kohen gadol should not marry a mukas eitz. All right. Uvogeres mitamila divikol adam. And everyone agrees, Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon, everyone agrees that by a bogeres, if he has a sister who's a bogeres and she's a basula, so then, she's not married or anything like that, so then he could become tameh to her. My time to Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda. How do we understand Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda who say that he is allowed to become tameh to his engaged sister? Okay, so my time to Meir Reb Yehuda, the Darshe Achi, that they understand the pasuk like this: V'lachosa basula, that when the pasuk says that a kohen can become tameh to his sister who's a basula, prad lanusa mufuta. So that excludes a woman who was raped or seduced, because in that case she's not a basula. Yachol shani motzi af mukas eitz. Is it possible that I will exclude even a mukas eitz? Tamalo mashelo hoyse leish. Well, it says that his sister, she wasn't ever with a man. Mishavayosai deish, somebody who. Right, a woman who lost her besulim from a man, but in mukas eitz, she didn't lose her besulim from a man. Hakrova l'rabusa arusa. When the pasuk says hakrova, that includes his sister who's in arusa. So there you go. So Meir and Reb Yehuda hold that a kohen is allowed to become tameh to his sister who is engaged, and that is learned out from hakrova. The pasuk says hakrova, that it includes also his sister who is engaged. Elav to him l'rabusa bogeres, to include his sister who is a bogeres. Halam alikra. So now the Gemara says, wait, why do I need a pasuk to teach me? Right? Why do I need to say Elav? And from Elav we come to include a bogeres. Didn't Reb Meir say the other day, where on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, Bisula afilu mikzas bisula mashma. That when it says bisula, that means even a partial besula, and therefore if it says v'achosa besula akrova elav, according to Reb Meir, that's even partial besula, even when she's a bogeres. So Memele should be able to become tameh to his sister who's a bogeres. Why do I need the pasuk of the word elav to teach me that? I know that besula means even a bogeres. So it's no, we need elav to teach us that he can become tameh to his sister who's a bogeres, because I may have thought to say besula may also. I may have thought that, well, it says besula by somebody who sleeps with a naira besula. So malahola naira afkanami naira kamash malan. I may have thought that just like over there where it says besula, it's talking about a naira, not a bogeres. So I may have thought that here as well, when it says besula by a sister who could become tameh to, so maybe besula means a naira, but not a bogeres. So therefore kamash malan elav, it says elav to include a bogeres. Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon, my tamayu. How come Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say that he may not become tameh to his sister who is engaged? Darshe achi. Well, they understand the pasuk in the following way: V'achosa absula, that his sister, he can become tameh to his sister who's a besula, prad lanusa mufuta umukas eitz, to the exclusion of his sister who was raped or seduced, or mukasetz ashelo who was never prat la arusa, and that excludes an arusa. So there you see that according to Rabbi Yossi and Reb Shimon, from the fact that it says ashelo that means that if she was engaged, that she was, betrothed to a man, so then he would no longer be able to become tamei to her. Hakrova l'rabos arusa shenizgarsha, when it says hakrova, that includes that if his sister was engaged and then got divorced from the engagement, so then he could become tamei to her if she dies. Elav l'rabos asabogeres, and when it says elav, it comes to include his sister who's a bogeres. Hakrova l'rabos arusa shenizgarshu. Frankly, Gemara, 1 second. We just said that from the word akrova, it comes to include his sister who was betrothed and then got divorced from the Erisin, from Reb Shimon. But doesn't Reb Shimon say, but didn't Reb Shimon, right, remember, this was the opinion of Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, and they're saying that akrova l'rabos arusa shenizgarsha, that the word akrova is coming to include a woman who was engaged and then got divorced, that her brother would be able to become tamei to her if she dies. Now, didn't Reb Shimon say that only somebody who a kohen gadol could marry, so then the brother could become tamei to her if she dies? Now, a woman who was engaged and then divorced, the kohen gadol cannot marry her. So then how come the brother could become tamei to her? Shiny awesome, the Rabbi Rachman Akrova. We say Eina Chinami, but it's different when in this particular case of his sister who was engaged and then divorced, because the pasuk specifically says Hakrova, from which we learn out, which comes to include the situation where she was engaged and then divorced. So meaning, yes, generally Reb Shimon's opinion would be that if she can't marry a kohen gadol, then her brother can't become tamei to her if she dies. But in this particular case, what the pasuk says Hakrova, from which we include when she was engaged and then divorced, so the pasuk comes to include it. Fine. Nami Rabbi. So then, why don't we also include mukasetz? If we're saying that from akrova, so we can include his sister who was engaged and then divorced. So it's also said that if his sister is a mukasetz, so then you should be able to come tamei to her as well. So, krova achas v'lo shtaim. From the word krova, we can only learn out one thing and not two, and that one thing is if she was engaged and then divorced. Umaro Isa, how come you specifically included when she was engaged and divorced? Maybe you should include a mukasetz to say that it could become tamei to her. Ha'isavid b'maisa, alo isavid b'maisa. Well, by mukasetz, there was actually a physical change to her body, as opposed to if she was engaged and then divorced, nothing changed in her actual body, and therefore that is sort of a lighter circumstance, and that is what is included from the word hakrova. It's easier to include it. For B'yosmi the shavke levarzuge michlal tibmukas eitz krav meir svirle. Now, if we look back at the brisa, so what does it say? It says mukas eitz ein metamila divri Reb Shimon. That's specific, right? Meaning, even though we're talking about the opinion of Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, the fact that he cannot become tamei to his sister's mukasetz, that's specifically Reb Shimon. Reb Yossi doesn't join Reb Shimon on that. So michlad mukasetz krav meir svirle. So it must mean that when it comes to mukasetz, Reb Yossi holds like Reb Meir, that he would be able to become tamei to his sister who's a mukasetz. Minole. So how does Reb Yossi learn that out? Milo haisalish. Well, the pasuk says that she wasn't to a man, and by mukasetz she was not to a man. But 1 second, we already used lo haisalish to teach that if she was engaged, so then he cannot become tamei to her. So chad mi lo haisa v'chad mi leish. No, so we're learning two, meaning from lo haisa, that comes to say that, but if she had kiddushin, so then he cannot become tamei to her. And then from laish, that's we learn out that she would have to lose her besulim from an ish. However, if she was a mukasetz, her brother would be able to become tamei to her. Elav the Rabbos Bogeres. Then we said that the word Elav comes to include a Bogeres, that a Kohen can become tamei to his sister's Bogeres. V'amar Reb Shimon besula shlema mashma. But didn't Reb Shimon, wasn't his opinion that when the pasuk says besula, it means a complete besula, and a Bogeres is not a complete besula. Say, and for the Gemara, time nami also me'ocha the darish. Me'ocha. Right? That, how does Reb Shimon know that the word besula means besula shlema? Dafka from here. The darish hachi, that he understands in the following way, the elav l'rabos abogeres michal the besula shlema mashma, from the fact that we need the word elav to include abogeres, that to say that a Kohen can become Tamid to his sister who's a Bogeres, that means that I would have otherwise thought no. Because I would have otherwise thought that Besula means Besula Shlema to the exclusion of his sister who's a Bogeres. Therefore I need the Pasuk Elif to say no, don't exclude her, include her, to say that he could become Tamid to her. But implication being that in other places where it says Besula, then it would exclude a Bogeres. It would exclude it would require Besula Shlema to the exclusion of a Bogeres who is not a Besula Shlema. So now the Gemara discusses the status of a girl who is less than 3 years old with regard to conversion. Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Omer says Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Giyoris pchus mi bashal shalom v'yom echad ksher lechuna. Says Reb Shimon ben Yochai that if you have a girl who converted to Judaism and she was less than 3 years old and a day, so then she could marry a Kohen. Shneimar, the Pasuk says, V'chol atav banoshim asher lo yodu mishkav zocher echiyu lochem. V'ari pinchas imoim. That it says by Midian that you have to kill all the people, but V'chol atav banoshim asher lo yodu mishkav zocher, that any of the children who did not have intercourse, echiyu lochem, so then you can keep for yourselves. And Pinchas was with them. Pinchas was a Kohen. So we see that any of these children who did not have intercourse, we want to assume that means that they're less than 3 years old. So then they can convert and you can take as wives. So we see, and Pinchas was with them. So we see that, and Pinchas was a Kohen. So we see that a Kohen is allowed to marry a girl who converted when she was less than 3 years old. Alright? For Rabbanan, the rabbis say it doesn't matter how old she is when she converts, a Kohen cannot marry her. The whole significance of the less than 3 thing was not for getting married, it was that you can keep them as like slaves and stuff. Now 1 second, according to Reb Shimon, it doesn't say anywhere in the Pasuk 3 years old, it says that they had never slept with a man. Nami. So then, even if she's 3 years old or older, as long as she never slept with a man, so then you can keep her alive. Well, then she would be able to convert as long as she, never slept with anybody. So Kid Rav Huna, so Rav Shimon understands the pasuk like how Rav Huna understands it. Rav Huna asked the kasha. Ksiv kol isha yodas ish lemishkav zachar arogu. On the one hand, the pasuk says that any woman who has had intercourse with a man, so then you have to kill her. Implying that, well, if she never had intercourse with a man, well then you can keep her alive. Implying that the children, regardless of if they had intercourse or not, you would be able to keep alive. But then the pasuk also says that any of the children who never had intercourse, you can keep them alive. But if they did have intercourse, then you have to kill them. So I don't know, what's the deal? Like on the one hand, it's implying that all the children, regardless, can stay alive. On the other hand, only if they didn't have intercourse. So no, it's not about actually whether you had intercourse or not. It means that, once she's an Isha, once she's above 3 years old, so then she's able to have intercourse. But less than that, she's unable to have intercourse. And then, okay, so that's what it's about. Tanya we also learn advice like this. When it says any woman who knows a man, meaning that she's able to have intercourse. Wait, is that really true? That it's talking about that she's simply fit to have intercourse, but it doesn't mean that she actually has to have had intercourse? When it says that any of these children that didn't have intercourse, it means that they're unable to have intercourse. They're unfit to have intercourse. They're too young. How would they know which people there by Midian were fit to have intercourse or not? So Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Reb Shimon Chasida, Havim Lifnei Atzitz. Well, they passed by all these kids in front of the tzitz, the Kohen Gadol's tzitz. Any girl whose face became sallow, I don't know what sallow means, but if her face became sallow, so that means that she is fit for bia. But if her face did not become sallow, so then she is not yet able to have bia, and she could be kept alive. Amr of Nachman Hadrokin says of Nachman that the sign for people who had forbidden relationships is that they get this terrible disease called Hadrokin. Similarly, there's another case where we had these people who were fit to have bia or not. That it says also in the context of Pilegish Begiva, when they, like all of the Shvatim went on to like war against Binyamin, and they were like all killed, and then there was this place called Yavish Gilad where they didn't help out in the war, and then they killed everybody there also. So then they found 400 Nara Besula Shelo Yadu Ish Lemishkov Zachar that never had intercourse. How would they know? How would they know who's fit to have intercourse or not? So Omer Rav Kahana, so it says Rav Kahana, Hoshivim apichovis shel yayin. Well, they did this test, and these girls would sit on a barrel of wine. Be'ula recha nodev, pesula recha nodev, and apparently, if she was not a besula, she was a be'ula, so then I guess the fragrance of the wine would just go straight through her body, and you'd be able to smell it out her mouth. Besula in recha nodev, but if she's a besula, then the scent of the wine would not go through her body and out her mouth. Alright. Why do you have to do this like interesting experiment with a wine barrel? Why not just pass these girls in front of the tzitz like by Midyan? Amr of Kana Breder of Nosin, L'rotzon Loim Ksiv. Well, it says by the tzitz that it should be like positive vibes. The Ratzim V'lo Puranos, it should be positive vibes, not negative vibes, and therefore we don't want to bring out the tzitz in order to like figure out who's got to get killed or not. If that's the case, then why bring out the tzitz for Midyan? Well, when it says that we want the tzitz to be sort of good vibes for the Yidden. For the Gentiles, it could also be used for bad vibes. Alright. Amr Yaakov bar Idi, says of Yaakov bar Idi, Amr Yeshua ben Levi, Halacha Reb Shimon ben Yochai. So it says of Yaakov bar Idi in the name of Yeshua ben Levi that the halacha is taka like Reb Shimon ben Yochai. That a girl who converts to Judaism less than 3 years old, so then she can marry a Kohen. Omar le Reb Zera le Yaakov bar Idi. So Reb Zera says to Yaakov bar Idi, B'feirush shmielach u'mechlalo shmielach. Did you hear this explicitly from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, or are you just implying that that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would say? My klala, where would he be able to imply it from? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, well, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that there was a certain city in Eretz Yisrael, that all of a sudden the Yentis started talking, and they were saying that apparently there was a Kohen who, apparently there was some kind of issue with the Kohen. So Rebbe sent Reb Romanus to figure out what exactly is what are the Yentas getting excited about. And it turns out that the Yentas were all excited because there was a Kohen in town who married a girl who converted at less than 3 years old. And Rebbe permitted this girl to remain married to he said it was no problem. So we see, so you can infer from this story that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi quoted, that according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that if a girl converts less than 3 years old, she could be married to a Kohen. So Yaakov bar Idi says, I heard it deliberately from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, not just inferred from this story. And to which the Gemara says, and what if Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yidi did infer it from the story. Who cares? Well, Dilma Shiny Osam Hov Insiv. Maybe I could ask that Rebbe permitted this couple to remain together perhaps only because they were already married. So, B'di Eved, he said, okay, fine, you can remain married. But if it was like Milichatchila, he would maybe Rabbi Shimon Levi would not say that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Milichatchila. The Rav Rabbi Yochanan Damar Tavar Bogeres Mukaseitz Lo Yisuf and also Nosui, because after all, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan both say that a Kohen Gadol should not marry a Bogeres or a Mukaseitz, but if he does, then they can then they could remain married. So therefore, I may have thought that here also maybe Rebbe doesn't necessarily hold, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also doesn't necessarily hold like Rabbi Shimon that milchatchila a Kohen can marry a woman, a girl who converted when she was less than 3, but maybe just in that case they're already married, so he said it was okay. Similar to if the Kohen Gadol marries a mukatzeitz or a boger, so they can remain married b'diavad. To which the Gemara says, yeah, but you can't just say that, well, maybe Bidi Eved he was saying it's okay, because it's apples and oranges. You can't compare that to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, because Rav and Rabbi Yochanan's examples were Bogeres and Mukas Eitz, both of which are sort of inevitable. Right? Even if a Kohen Gadol marries a Katana, she's going to end up being a Bogeres. Right? Even if he marries a Besula, they're going to have intercourse together, and she's going to be essentially not a Besula, which is the problem with Mukaseit. Now, that's not the case by a girl who converts less than 3 years old. Right? If the concern is that maybe she's a zona, that maybe she had a relationship with somebody else, well then that's not inevitable, and therefore, while Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are willing to say that by Bogeres and Mukaseitz it's okay, right, that the Kohen Gadol can remain married to her, that could only be in those cases it's inevitable. But here, if the halacha is that a Kohen would be unable to marry a girl that's less than 3 years old, the concern would be that maybe she was a zona, in which case it's not like that was inevitable. And therefore, from the fact that Rebbe said that they could remain married means that even milchatchila they could remain married, and therefore we could say that even the inference would be a good inference, that from the fact that Rebbe allowed them to remain married, it means even milichatchila. Rav Safra masnilo michlala. So Rav Safra actually understood that it was only an inference from the story of Rabbi Shimon Levi, v'kashale, and he had the same kasha. But wait, maybe it doesn't necessarily imply that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, because maybe the only reason why Rebbe said that it was allowed is because they were already married. Mushani le hachi, but he answered it in the same way that we answered it. Say that no, that's not really a good question, because in this case, b'diavad wouldn't really work, because if we're going to say it's not good, it's because she's a zona, in which case you can't just say, well, you were married anyway, so you could stay together, and therefore. So if Safra learned it out from this implication, and that is fine. Kahana de Ansiv Gioris, there was a certain Kohen who married a convert, and she was less than 3 years old when she converted. Amarle Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said to this Kohen, hi, what's the deal? Why are you marrying this girl? Amarle the Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yidi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi lacha Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, because Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yidi said the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, that the lacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that if she converts when she's less than 3, so then she can marry a Kohen. To which Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, you better get the heck out of here, and if not, I'm going to release Rabbi Yaakov Bar Yidi from your ears. I'm going to excommunicate you or something. I don't know. It sounds like Nachman Bar Yitzchak did not feel like the halacha was like Reb Shimon on this matter. Alright, well that was Daf Samach of Masechta Yevamos. We discussed that if a Kohen Gadol marries somebody who he raped or seduced, so then they're technically married, but they have to get divorced right away. And we talked about what happens if a Kohen Gadol sleeps with an anusa or mufuta from somebody else. So we saw the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov And the Chacham, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, says that the child that they have together would be a chol. The Chacham say that the child would not be a chol. Rav Ashi explains the machlokas as being about, is there chalol by chayve ese? That right, when it says that the Kohen Gadol needs to marry Besula, it implies that he cannot marry a Be'ula, and therefore it's a positive commandment. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that there would even be a chalol by if she's a Be'ula, whereas according to the Chacham, however, say that no, she would not be considered a chalol based on the psukim, that Eile kind of breaks it up. Then we saw a machlok, and then we got into the sugya of a Kohen becoming tummy to his sister. And the kasha was, if his sister was engaged, can he become tummy to her? Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir say that yes, he can become tummy to her. Reb Shimon and Reb Yossi say that he cannot become tummy to her. Then we saw the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Yochai that if a girl converts to Judaism at less than 3 years old, so then she can marry a Kohen. The Chacham argue and say no, even if she converted when she was less than 3, she cannot marry a Kohen. Friends, that was after Samach of 60 of Masechet Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.